From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Good afternoon. My name is Travis Hensley, and I'm a program specialist here at the John W. Kluge Center. Before we begin today's program, please take a moment to check your cell phones and other electronic devices and set them to silent. This afternoon's program is being filmed for placement on the Kluge Center's website, as well as our YouTube and iTunes channels. Today's lecture is presented by the John W. Kluge Center here at the Library of Congress. The John W. Kluge Center is a vibrant scholars center on Capitol Hill that brings together scholars and researchers from around the world to energize one another, to distill wisdom from the library's rich resources, and to interact with policymakers and the public. The center offers opportunities for senior scholars and postdoctoral fellows to do research in the Library of Congress collections. We also offer free public lectures, conferences, symposia, and other programs, and administer the Kluge Prize, which recognizes outstanding achievement in the study of humanity. We will be holding the Kluge Prize in 2018. For more information about the Kluge Center, visit loc.gov/Kluge, and I invite you to sign up for our RSS email list to learn about future programs and opportunities for research. Today's program is titled Mapping the Landscape, Vision, Memory, and Placemaking. It is being presented by Dr. Xin Wu, who is an associate professor of art and history at the College of William and Mary. She specializes in the history of the representation of nature in East Asian art and global contemporary environmental art and landscape architecture. As a Kluge Fellow for the last year, Professor Wu has leveraged the library's collections to help develop a book manuscript on vision and placemaking in the Neo-Confucian Academies of Song China. Please join me in welcoming Professor Wu.
Thank you for the introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming and for your support. I'm very honored to be part of the time-honored lecture series of Kluge Scholars Lectures. In last year, I was very fortunate to be able to spend a whole year very productive here as the Kluge Fellow. While I was able to work on my book manuscript on Song Academy, but also discover new materials for many future projects. So this progress would not be possible without many of the support from here in the center and in the library. Especially the interdisciplinary environment of the center and the research sources at the library. I'm indebted to many people, and many are here. And I'm sorry I wouldn't be able to mention all the names, especially from Asian Division, Geography and Map Division, and the Rare Book and the Special Collections. At the Kluge Center, I thank especially Mary Rurick and Travis Hensley for constant support and encouragement, which you really need in a long fellowship. And also Chet Van Duzer, devoted historian of cartography and NEH fellow in residence. He deserves a special acknowledgement for calling my attention to Library of Congress collection of rare Chinese historical maps, and for inspiring many of the questions I set out to discuss right now. As an art historian and a trained architect engaged with historical map, the materiality of the artifact is central to my concern. I should take the art medium employed in traditional Chinese maps as a departure point of my inquiry, and proceed to discuss three types of related spaces it calls forth. That is, the cartographic space, the pictorial space, and the physical space. My focus here will be on mapping as the action of positioning. That is a process in practice rather than on maps as the result of that practice, of that process. We are familiar with maps created on the flat surface of two-dimensional media, such as paper or parchment, and presented in various formats, such as sheets, book, album, scroll. However, these media are not to be taken for granted as the only ones for making maps. Stele is in the Chinese cartographic tradition are typical of a quite different medium in three-dimensional form, just like globes in the Western cartographic tradition. We have many globes in our collection in the maps and geography and maps, but we don't have actually a stele in the collection. Stele are an important media that carries symbolic meaning. Major steles often stand over 20 meters high, being decorated at the bottom, at the base, decorated with the two sons of two sons of dragon. The one on top is the literary loving Fuxi in the form of a dragon. That's the picture on upright. At the bottom is the son of the other, on the base is the Bixi, who is in the form of a turtle carrying the stele. Legend has it that Bixi, the turtle, was a flood-causing monster. It was tamed by the mythical King Yu, who led the people through the deluge. In an action named Zhen, King Yu forcefully put the monster under control by suppressing it with the stele. The stele was engraved with records of his accomplishment at flood control that guaranteed internal protection to the land of China. Thus launched the Chinese civilization. For millennia, stele bearing inscriptions and images were erected in the landscape and in important locations such as palace and tombs, fulfill the dual function of commemoration and of good deeds and suppressing evil spirits. Following the unification of China in 211 BCE, the first emperor, for instance, erected 7 stele during his inspection tour throughout the empire to commemorate his triumph and to mark the territory. The first of these stele was erected immediately after the unification in 210 BCE in Kuiji, to worship the mythical king, precisely the person we just mentioned, who, like the first emperor and before him, was believed to have inspected all the land of China during the survey of mountain and water in the order of flood control. All 7 steles was placed on the top of major mountains after ritual worship addressed to the heaven and the earth that officially guaranteed the divine power of the emperor. They do not only mark the boundaries of the new empire, but also to orient, indicate the first emperor's rule over the vast territory from the Great Wall to the South China Sea. Stele has constituted a very important cultural media throughout Chinese history, the Han Dynasty scholars collected and rectified the classics of Confucius' teaching which the first emperor tried to destroy. So they had them carved on stele in standard calligraphic script and displayed in the cities. That was the famous Xiping stone classics. Records has it at 40. It has 40 plus stele, holds over 200,000 characters, and people come, thousands of them, to view and read and make rubbings. It is erected in the center of the capital city. Following this precedent, starting in the 6th century CE, many Buddhist sutras and images were carved on stele and placed in mountains around major temples, transforming nature landscape into religious setting. From the Song Dynasty onwards, steles were used as records for classic studies and presented in government and private schools. Classics and canonical texts were inscribed on the stone tablets, as we see on the image here, and placed in the gardens and throughout of the academy compound. By the 3rd century, the image scholars reading stele to visit antiquity had become a popular theme in literature, and painting soon followed suit. This Song Dynasty painting reading the stele nest stone depicts a scholar and his attendant boy, in front of a towering stele, looking upward in admiration. Old gnarled trees in a wintry landscape, a testimony to a Chinese sense of history as the ceaseless dialogue between the past and the present. The presence of the stele and the timeless message it carries transport the scholar into historical time and space. Here, the agency at work does not only derive from the message engraved on the stone surface, but also from the stele's physical existence in the landscape as a monumental and historical symbol. One cannot separate the message from the media and the media from its location. Thus, the physical existence of a stele in a place establishes a reference point for reading its content. And in reciprocal fashion, inscriptions and images on stele bestows symbolic meaning to places brought to viewers' attention by their presence. This map is, we have a rubbing of it in the library's collection. Stele was a common used media in the Chinese cartographical tradition. This map of the ancient city Pingjiang in South Song China Dynasty is the world's oldest engraved city map. The stele was engraved in 1229. It was erected in the Confucius Temple of Pingjiang Prefecture, modern-day Suzhou in Jiangsu province. The original stone has now been removed from its original site and housed in the Museum of Engraved Stone Tablets in Suzhou. Library of Congress owns a rare version, actually. It's a rare stone rubbing of this stele dated to the end of 19th century. That is the time of the rubbing was made. Was between 1858 to 1869. It was a gift from the American Presbyterian missionary William Gamble in 1938, and it is one of the earliest and the largest stone rubbing map in China. This line drawing based on the stele gives us a clearer view of the relief on this 13th century engraved stone. The map is remarkably detailed, containing the city wall, the governor's quarter, buildings and gardens, and a dense network of roads, rivers, canals, over 250 temples and halls, and 65 gateways and 359 bridges. North is on top, and the chain of mountain is depicted west of the city wall. In the close-up view to the right of the screen, the network of streets, canals, and rivers is projected as a typical plan view, while the city wall, architecture, mountains are presented in a pictorial rendering as seen from an elevated viewpoint, exactly as in traditional Chinese landscape painting. This I shall identify as a juxtaposition of cartographic and pictorial space. The engraved map measuring 9.5 feet to 5 feet is larger than most map created on a single sheet of parchment. The stele, standing at nearly 9.5 feet tall and 5.5 feet wide and 1 foot thick, commands a more impressive presence than a two-dimensional map. This map as a monumental object may remind contemporary museum goers of the time-honored literary tradition of reading stele to visit the ancient sites. Imagine that the stele was still in its original outdoor setting. Then what is a map? Is it the image carved on the stone surface, or is it the stele bearing that image? By focusing on the medium, here the stele, the question arises about the relationship between cartographic representation of space and the physical presence of space, in space. In this case, we are presented with a condensation of cartographic and physical space. If, as shown in the painting, the stele as an object provides a connection to a longer history and a large space that establish the coordinate for decoding the content of a map, then changes of a stele's physical location will alter our understanding of the map. This brief detour through the media of stele as a media of the map then draws our attention to different types of spaces that Chinese cartography engaged with. While it will be helpless to try to define what is a map, I have just highlighted the 3 types of spaces that are relevant to my study of mapping as the action of positioning. The cartographic space defined by a plan and its coordinates that provides the manifesting meaning of this work. The pictorial space presenting an iconic view that triggers visual images of place. And finally, the physical space on the ground where a map stands and partially represents. Next, I shall proceed to discuss the interrelationship between these different types of space and their impact on mapping the landscape. The material I use are mostly visual, Due to the time constraint, I shall not be able to discuss the gazetteers, which is an indispensable branch of Chinese cartography tradition that emphasizes textual records. Let's start with two ancient stele. I should explore the question around the two oldest extant maps in China. They are presently in the forest of stone stele in one of the most impressive museums of the modern city Xi'an, that is in the site of the ancient capital Chang'an. The two maps were engraved on the two sides of the same stele during the Song Dynasty in 1136. At the government school of Qingzhou, near the ancient capital of Chang'an in the Yellow River tributary. They were first studied and published in the Western world by French sinologist Edouard Chevin in 1903, and later praised by the British scholar Joseph Needham as the most outstanding maps of their time in his Science and Civilization in China. On one side of the stone, we can see Huayi Tu, the map of Chinese and barbarians, or the map of Chinese and foreigners. It was based on the map of Chinese and the barbarians within the sea, completed by Tang Dynasty cartographer Jia Dan in 801. The cardinal directions are marked on 4 sides, with north on top. The map details the mountains, rivers, and the cities of the empire, and indicates its northern border by highlighting the location of the Great Wall. Actually, this was the first time Great Wall was presented that we know. Territories of neighboring states and nomadic groups were not shown graphically, but listed in texts, arranged accordingly around the map. To a certain extent, this map may be equivalent to a continental map, serving as a tool for the Song court to keep track of its tributary states and enemies. Records has it that the same map was painted in gold lacquer on a screen behind the throne of the second Southern Song Emperor Xiaozong. On the other side of the map, of the stone, is Yu Ji Tu, the map of the tracks of King Yu. That's the king we have mentioned at the very beginning. It is also called the map of the lands where the sage Emperor Yu left his traces from his survey for flood control. Historians of Chinese cartography agree that the original maps used for the engraving on the stele were made much earlier, probably around before 1100. Over 500 ancient and contemporary place names are plotted on the map, which represents a panorama of China in Song times. The engraving of the hydrologic system is especially detailed, with nearly 80 rivers and over 70 mountains named. Representations of the river, of the Yellow River and the Yangtze River courses are very close to their appearance on present-day map. That is to say, it's rather accurate. The contour of the sea coast is also quite accurate. Among surviving maps engraved in stone, this map is the oldest and the earliest to have grade marks indicating scale. It is the prime example of the level of map making in China during the 12th century at least. Its title makes reference to the mythical King Yu's inspection of ancient the ancient land of China, the map offers a presentation of mountains and the rivers listed in ancient records of the track of the king during his flood control survey, which assumably covered the whole land of China. In this way, the myth of King Yu thus gives rise to a Chinese cartographic tradition that refers place locations to mountains and the river water features on the land, and stresses the functional importance of water management. Our early discussion has underscored the importance of a stele's existence in physical location, in physical space, and its impact on our understanding of the meaning of its content. The engraving of two maps, one continental, one national, on each side of the stele, implies that the location where it stood marked both the divide of China and its neighbors, barbarians, and the heartland of the Central Kingdom. But why so, and how? And was the stele intended for due function, as we mentioned earlier, that is, to commemorate the lost empire, or to suppress its aggressive enemies? Before answering those questions, let's turn to a correlated mapping event. 6 years later, one of the two maps, the map of the tracks of King Yu, that is the national map, was reproduced in a different place. In 1142, this new stele was engraved and erected in the government school in the city of Zhenjiang along the Yangtze River. When we confront with two identical map stele in two very distant places, let's engage in a more detailed reading for the sake of comparison between the two. They are almost identical, disappointing, with two noticeable differences. First, the legend of the 1142 map, that is the one to the right, to my right, yes, also to your right, clearly indicates that it was made after the early engraving of Chang'an, that is the map to the left. Secondly, the sea was hatched in wave pattern on the 1142 map and not in the early map, and left blank in the 1136 version. The cartographer of the original map remains unknown. The fair amount of debate goes around. It is one version, it is attributed to the polymath and the scientist Xin Conan-Wu, who had been a governor near Chang'an, that's where the first map was carved, and later retired to his hometown, Zhenjiang, that's where the second stele was carved, while he compiled the famous brush talk from the Dream Brook. A look at the map, a map made by Xin Conan-Wu. A similar presentation of the sea on this map might support this attribution of possible authorship. The map of the prefecture and the counties of the 9th district is the earliest extant map on stele. It was engraved in 1121 at the prefecture school, excavated in 1936 in the middle of Cultural Revolution. It is now housed in the Museum of Sichuan Province. Besides its remarkable accuracy, the map boasts a uniquely elaborated pictorial depiction of the sea that is incomparable to any other known maps of medieval China. Unfortunately, the library do not have a copy of a rubbing of this map. The presentation of the sea includes ship, dragons, horses, and fishes, all sorts of celestial beings. It is worth mentioning that Shen Kuo, the author of this map, in his book, The Brush Talk from the Dream Brook, is an encyclopedic anthropology of essays covering not only science but also humanities, and that he is, in the history of art painting, he was the one who coined the time-honored landscape painting theme, 8 Views of Xiaoxiang. Now let's move back, return to the 2 stele bearing the map of tracks of King Yu. The fact that the media of the map was not a portable sheet of paper that we can carry around, but a heavy stele fixed to the ground, begs further scrutiny of the intention behind the engraving and re-engraving and the relocation of this stele map. By a paradoxical twist, the location of the original stele, the former capital city of Chang'an, was actually outside of the Chinese border. In the year of 1136, when the first stone was engraved. In 1127, China was defeated by the invading Zhuchen and lost its capital city, Kaifeng. Empress Huizong and his successor, Qingzong, together with over 3,000 members of the court, were captured. The remaining of the Song court fled to the south and re-established itself in Lin'an, modern-day Hangzhou. This movement of the Song court marked the end of the Northern Song and the beginning of the Southern Song. The 2 maps to the left shows the location of the southern border, the border of the Southern Song and Northern Song. One, especially when in the Southern Song period, we can see the size of China almost shrank to half. Management of a vast former Chinese territory with its far more advanced agriculture and economy, however, was beyond the ability of a nomadic invader. And there is a solution. A puppet court, Daqi, ruled by a former Chinese official, was established between 1130 and 1137. Precisely in that period is the stele carved. The original stele, therefore, was engraved at a special moment at history, in between the territory of China and its barbarian invader, under a puppet government established by the occupier, but run by a Chinese official in order to rule a Chinese populace. Although we cannot be sure the rationale behind the making of the original stele, the fact that it was located at the ancient capital of Chang'an instead of the fallen Northern Song capital may indicate a denial of the defeat and nostalgia for the expansive, powerful Chinese empire during the Han and the Tang dynasties. Given a stele's dual function in commemorating good deeds and suppressing evil, it may also have embodied a claim for legitimacy as a Chinese emperor by the ill-fated puppet ruler. On the other hand, the action of engraving a stele bearing the same map and thus relocate the map to Zhenjiang. In the south, reposition the map of Qingyu back in the only legitimate Chinese territory at the time. Back to the Song time, the remaking and the relocation of the stele from Chang'an to Zhenjiang, as here we can see, highlighted the shift of the center of China from Yellow River region to the Yangtze River. An examination of the structure of the land of China shows a divide of the north and the south along the tributaries of the two rivers, while the Great Canal, that is the purple line, provides a south-north connection between the two river systems. When the north was lost, the city of Zhenjiang at the intersection of Yangtze and the canal was at the heart of a newly established Southern Song territory, mainly expanding over the tributary of the lower Yangtze. The erection of a stele here bearing the full map of Qingyu's track therefore asserts the court's control of China in its putative whole, no matter how elusive that vision might be. The map was overtly mystic, but not political, yet the location of the stele implies a political statement of possession. To underline the complexity of such a map on stele as a meaning-making monument, this stele derived part of its legacy agency from its location and in return bestows a symbolic value to the region where it stood as a bulwark against potential invaders. This is only one example of the recursive relationship implied by a map on stele that allows its physical location to inform the manifest meaning of the map, enduring it with symbolic agency, which in turn casts the whole site in a new light. It is mapping as an action of positioning. Now let's turn to the site of Zhenjiang. As mentioned earlier, the presence of stele in the landscape and the timeless message it carries transport the scholar into a historical time and space. Since the manifest content of a map is a representation of place, the changing significance of a place through history in turn can be reflected by changes in the map's pictorial space. To illustrate this point, we shall zoom in on the site of Zhenjiang and quickly survey some changes in its fate and in the mapping of its landscape. Zhenjiang sits along the Yangtze River at the crossing between the river and the Great Canal. Its name literally means securing or suppressing the Yangtze. The word Zhen precisely is the word I mentioned when the mythical king was trying to control the turtle. The character Zhen, to suppress, refers to the action King Yu performed to suppress Bixi, the turtle dragon, with a stele. Here, the subject of suppression was flooding by the Yangtze River. Militarily, the character Zhen also means securing and defending. At the end of the 6th century, the city was made into an important garrison on the lower Yangtze River, and soon become a commentary site. And its importance grew with the construction of the Grand Canal in the 7th century. From the 8th century BCE onwards, Zhenjiang was the seat of a feudal domain under various names legend has it that the site's feng shui was so great that the first emperor had to order 3,000 prisoners to dig a tunnel through one of its hills in order to dissipate its spiritual energy. During the Northern Song, when China was under constant threat of Juchen invasion from the north, the Yangtze River became an important natural barrier. And the city of Zhenjiang, at the cross-section of the river and the canal, gained further attention from the throne. The prefecture of Zhenjiang was established in 1113, that is 1113, by Song Huizong, the last emperor of Northern Song, who resigned there before he was enthroned, and who was interested in southern landscapes. Politically, Huizong was remembered as a terrible king who lost his whole empire. But culturally, he was remembered as an accomplished artist and an exceptional patron for the arts. The year of 1113 that gave rise to Zhenjiang Prefecture also saw the birth of a masterpiece in Chinese painting history. That's what we see on the screen. This spectacular blue-green landscape, 1,000 li of river and mountains, was completed by a student of Huizong in the Imperial Painting Academy. Although the title of this 36-feet-long scroll does not contain the name of Yangtze, it is often considered to be the first known attempt in presenting the Long River in a holistic manner. To order such a major work, the emperor reigned in the north clearly paid particular attention to the Yangtze in the south. The scroll closes with a mountain. We are seeing the end section of the scroll. It closes with a mountain on the shoreline overlooking the open water, implied the mouth of the river. It calls our attention to changes in Chinese visual culture and to the use of an imperial style tradition. The blue and green landscape painting originated in Tang Dynasty. The early surviving gazetteers of Zhenjiang Prefecture was compiled in 1213, that is 100 years later than the painting and the establishment of the prefecture. Following the Northern Song's defeat by the Juchen and the establishment of the Southern Song, the Yangtze River replaced the Yellow River as a natural barrier between Imperial China and its barbarian invaders. The importance of Zhenjiang as a military defense position and a cultural historical site increased further, which led to the compilation of the multiple gazetteers. When the North and the South were rejoined under the Mongol court after the collapse of the Southern Song, Zhenjiang remained significant as the crossroads of two of China's key water traffic system, the Yangtze and the Grand Canal, which explains why it is mentioned by Marco Polo. And Marco Polo's description of China under the Great Han in his book of the Marvels of the World has led to imaginary depiction of Chinese cities in several early modern European maps. On Farah Maurer's map of 1455, for example, Zhenjiang was depicted in the fashion of a medieval city. So it's other Chinese cities. And the blue course showing is Yangtze. Another name of Zhenjiang is Jinkou. The term Jinkou refers to a challenging path guided by high mountains. In reality, the three mounts, Mount Jin, Jiao, and Beigu, are actually not very high. Although they are now surrounded by marshes as seen in this satellite photograph. Two of the Mounts Jing and Jiao were islands in mainstream in the Song time, which earned them the name floating jade. Alongside growing attention for the Yangtze River, the loss of the North and the military defeat spurred the development of historical geography and local history during the Southern Song period. Zhenjiang was presented in an important prefecture seat in two major works of imperial geography combined in the beginning of the 13th century. Almost cohere with the compilation of these geographic books, a long scroll entitled 10,000 Li along Yangtze River is created in the early Southern Song period. The 55 feet long scroll shows a bird's eye view of the Yangtze River from its traditional source in the Ming Mountain all the way to the sea. You can see on the screen the scroll's ending section again, which shows how the lower Yangtze enters the sea. Following the same convention as the imperial vision, the landscape view is oriented towards the south. That is, the river actually ends to the left side of the painting. In reality, the river flows east. Let's turn to close-up view of the close-up of the one small section, which reveals the detailed depiction of the city of Zhenjiang, standing while the Grand Canal crosses Yangtze. It's really difficult to see at the bottom of the screen that that was just a little bit on the original scroll. Barges come from the city of Yangzhou on the north part of the Grand Canal, would pass the canal around the watermelon island, while the canal goes around and cross the current and enter the south section of the canal in near Zhenjiang, sail all the way down to the capital in the south, the Hangzhou city. If we compare the two paintings, what we can see is the location of the Zhenjiang is in this location. Okay? It's rather close to the end of the painting already, which indicates that at the time, seems educated people, highly cultivated people who produce those paintings does not know much about the Yangtze further down from Zhenjiang, the point of Zhenjiang. And when we check the travel records or in literature, we found support to that argument. Two of the major records showing the travels all the way down from Yangtze, one upstream and one downstream. Both indicates that they take a break in the point of crossing, and then turn into the canal system from the main Yangtze. That is to say, at the time, the travel on Yangtze River would be ended in the spot when the boats can turn into the canal system instead of goes all the way down to the sea. Also on this map, painting, we can see that in the lower, the picture below is showing the two islands, and those are the two islands in front of Zhenjiang. The idea of floating jade on the big river has become a painting theme in the Northern Song period, as here we see. On the other records we have in the Asian division, an illustrated atlas of Yangtze Prefecture actually shows the same mountain, the Yangtze River and the Grand Canal goes into the northern section. The same mountain will be depicted in very different medias, and it's easy to recognize because there is this pagoda. Later on, in Ming Dynasty, in 1512, the three mountains starting to be presented as a whole, as an iconic landscape, and the gazetteers were produced in their name. Two maps in a private collection by Wellesley Brown shows very interestingly two different views of the three mountains as a group. The map titled Floating Jade of the Zhenjiang Prefecture shows the three mountains in the shape of a tripod. As the album of the Three Mountains of Jinko shows the three mountains also in the same format. And on top of it, we will see details of the cultural sites on each of the mountains. At the far end of the map, that is Yangtze Prefecture, in the north on the north shore of Yangtze. The two maps gives us very different views of the group of three mountains. By this time in the Ming Dynasty, it's already become an iconic landscape. If the choice of viewing perspective, a precise cardinal position as the horizontal pictorial presentation could carry symbolic meanings, in a sense like a stele. Even through the symbolism would be entirely different. One media could not substitute the other. The map in painting of the 10,000 li of Yangtze recorded an expansive version of the land as intended for the emperor's gaze. Since the throne was always facing south, the painting looked towards the south as if it were under the emperor's gaze. Yet at the time of its painting was in the south zone when the court was actually located in the south and looking towards the north, to Yangtze. Interestingly, Pharaoh Mauro's map did not follow the cartographic convention of the time to put either the east or the north on top. Similar to the imperial vision in Chinese, instead he uses south on top, similar to the imperial vision in a Chinese scroll, a strange coincidence that Pharaoh Mauro himself already tried to explain. I do not want to give the impression that there is a linear development of the presentation in the Chinese tradition. All the different methods actually are used together. Here we see what we see is a Qing Dynasty map of the canal, showing precisely in the cross spot between the Yangtze and the canal. The text accompanying the maps is no longer exist, so it would be difficult to reconstruct exactly the information. But we can say this map is very accurate, and it probably is intended for military use or water control. The fate of Zhenjiang changed in the later 19th century during the Opium War. What we see on the screen are maps and engraving made by the British troop during the Battle of Zhenjiang. The British took Zhenjiang and eventually forced the Chinese emperor to sign treaties, eventually led to the opening of Zhenjiang in the after the battle, Zhenjiang was open to trade after the second Opium War, open to foreign trade in 1859. The British consulate was established there in 1864. The city remained a British concession until 1927. After the Grand Canal lost its importance to the railroads, Zhenjiang declined in the later 19th century. While looking at this melancholic image, I would like to wrap up the idea presented. That is how we have observed the three very different types of space in the map making of the traditional Chinese map making, which was carried by very different art medias, ranging from stele to long scroll and the album pages. It's difficult to isolate them from one another, and in the traditional sense, they were all juxtaposed and used together to build up a very rich interpretation for the plays, what they supposed to show. The major change come after 19th century when many of the map making adopted the modern method, and that the Chinese map making has been seen in more of a domain of cultural practice and meaning making, and that's what I say. In the traditional sense, it was much more of an action of positioning in terms of the making of the map. Okay, thank you. I guess I can take a few questions. Do you have the time?
I did have a question. It was about your statement about the placement of the map having an effect on meaning and the map's meaning itself. And if I understood you.
Yes.
And I'm wondering how that happens to roll out into the culture. I mean, does it roll out in literature? Does it, a writer comes into the stone garden and sees a map and then, some new kind of literature comes out of it or something? I wonder if you'd speak to that.
Yes, actually it become a very important aspect, and as a continue of the literary tradition, especially I didn't have time to mention in my research in the academy. Actually, it's very important for that kind of engagement with the space, as the space become in a way flip over of carrying the message that was on the stele, and then how the information located in a particular space will extend into a historical time and space and connect the reader into the history. So it's the physical presence of the map actually become the vehicle to drive the reader into a larger context that makes the map important.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, if we have
Any more questions? Would everyone please join me? Is there any more? No? Okay. Join me in thanking Dr. Xin Wu for the lecture.
Okay, thank you very much.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.